I'm Arati, and this is my winter travel art kit. I use it when I'm going out plein air, or even when I'm sitting in my drawing room or the garden to draw, or when I go on holidays or trips, or even to my sister's house. Let me unzip it and show you what is in here. I have previously shared my autumn travel kit, which was the palette before this one, so do go check that out as well. In here, I have some zipped pockets, this pencil case pocket thing, and my sketchbook along with a bunch of markers. I have pre-swatched my little palette for you, so it saves us a little bit of time and we can do some fun color palettes with this at the end of the video. So in my winter travel kit, here's a little detailed look at it if you want to screenshot and save for later. Let's start with the pencils that I have in this. I hope you can see everything clearly there. We have, to start with, the Blackwing Matte pencil, which is this one. I use it mostly for outlines or for adding details. The second one here is the Pitt Graphite Matte. I really like this because it doesn't shine, unlike other pencils when you use it on top of other materials. Then I have one of my favorite pencils, which is the Faber-Castell Grip 1347, and in this I've got plain 0.7 graphite lead. Every time I'm making notes, so all this text is written mostly with the pencil. I also have in this little pocket here the Lumos pen. Now I have messed up this end, so I've got to go send it for repair hopefully, but this end has a chisel tip, which I've just changed, but I had the 0.3 mm nib in there, so right now I've got the chisel tip in, but that's what I had throughout the winter. Next, I've got a bunch of Neocolour IIs in here. There's a dark green, and that's what it looks like when you put water on it. Neocolour yellow, golden yellow, white. I mean, you can't really see the white there, but on this cream paper, you can really see it stand out. Then I've got an indigo, and again, that's what it looks like diluted. I mostly use Neocolours diluted rather than with the full color. Rather than neat. That's a good term. Then there's turquoise blue, turquoise green, and I have a Neocolour I, which is non-water soluble. It's just to have details over the top where I don't want the white to sort of blend in. I also have a few other whites. One is this Caran D'Ache Aquarelle White. I really like the way it looks on top of black. So here you can see I've put some Sharpie underneath so you can see how that white actually looks. Then I've got a bunch of different whites. One is this chunky Posca that I showed you in one of my art hauls recently. I also have the Caran marker, which you can see looks pretty decent. Caran marker whites. Then I recently got this Stabilo Woody when April Monkey Mintaka was in town. I picked this one up. Just the one Woody, not the whole set, which is, you can see that there. That's on top of black. And then I have another Posca white in a smaller size, and I have the Pitt Artist's Pen in white as well. So this gives you slightly less of a white, so when you just want some details but you don't want a white like Posca is, that's when I use this pen. So those are all the whites. An essential in my book. Then let's come back to this side and look at some of the pencils. So you can see all the pencils here in the background, but here are the colors. Posca 77, Luminance Dark Sap Green 739, an essential for me, and you can see how much I use it by the fact that it's down to a nub. I have bought a replacement though. Then I've got the Derwent Lightfast Forest, Posca number 7, Luminance Raw Umber 10% number 842, Luminance Castle Earth 046, Luminance Sepia 407, and the Polychromos Burnt Umber in 280, Luminance Noir 09, that's just a black, and then Derwent Chromaflow Deep Sea 1320, which I really love, and I have replaced this pencil because it is getting kind of tiny. Posca Indigo and Posca number 15 Red, because of all the berries during the winter that are really nice and red. I have a few extras also, one of which is this sharpener. I really like it. I have emptied it for you so I can show you how you empty it. So this whole bit comes out and you empty that out. And you can tell which way it goes back in because one end is rounded, and it does have two sizes, and it fits really neatly. I used to use the Jacquard sharpener, but some of my pencils didn't fit in one of their holes. I can't remember which, so I got this one. And then I have one of my favorite things, a kneaded eraser, which is really nice for removing details, but it doesn't leave any shavings, like an eraser shavings. Like if you do that, it takes away the pencil, but it doesn't leave those little bits, especially when I'm out in public somewhere. I don't want to be scattering those all over the place. The other thing I got is an eraser pencil. I picked this up from, I think it was London Graphic Centre, again when April was here, and it's really nice to erase details. So if I want to have highlights or something, that's what it does. And I can also sharpen this, and it does have a little brush. I use this sparingly because it does leave eraser little bits, so I wouldn't use it anywhere where I might leave them behind, or I can just do the eraser bits, open my sharpener, and sort of pop them inside like that, just to keep things neat and tidy. So there's that. And I also have a water pen, which is my favorite Caran D'Ache one, which has a marker tip rather than a brush nib, which I really enjoy. So that's how it works. Now throughout the winter I've been using mostly markers, not paint. So here are the markers that I use. Again, I'm not going to take them out of here because there are quite a lot, but I have swatched them for you, both to save time as well as to show you the colors that I have. I'll show you the brands as I go, just so you can recognize them. The first is the Ecoline Warm Grey. It's my one and only Ecoline pen. I think I probably will get some more eventually, but for now I have so many colors in other markers that I don't really need it. But I suppose when I run out of something, I might go and replace it with an Ecoline pen. Then I have Caran markers. These are the Caran Deco Brush markers, which are acrylic markers, but they have a brush nib, which I really enjoy. So those are there. That's the second brand. This is Neutral Grey 1. Then of course I have the Tombows. You've seen these many times. I've done a video about them as well. So the Tombow marker is the third brand that I use, and I've got that in N65, N79, N15, which is just plain black, 452 blue, 528 another blue, and then Winsor & Newton indigo, which it has fast become one of my favorite colors to use. This is the watercolor pen. It's got a nib on one side and then a brush tip on the other. I must admit that I only ever use the brush tip and very rarely the pen tip. Then Caran marker again, olive black, fast becoming one of my favorite colors. Tombow 249, a green, so we're coming into the greens now. Tombow 177, a Posca khaki. So that's this one, number 7. Because sometimes you just want an inky one where you can spread it around and mush it around. Then Tombow 098, which is a lovely golden yellow green, like a kind of like a green gold, but not more yellow than more yellow than green. Then green Tombow 228, I use this a lot. 312, which is kind of like a pale azure blue mixed with green, kind of weird color, but it works for a lot of things. Tombow 912, 922, which are kind of pale pinky shades, and 757, which is again a berry shade like the Posca 15. Then Winsor & Newton watercolor marker again sepia, a Posca brown 21, Caran in sandstone, praline, Tombow 026, the Winsor & Newton cadmium yellow hue. Again, this is a pen that I use a lot, and a Caran pastel yellow, and a Tombow orange in 925. So that is my entire winter travel kit, and I have been using it. If you saw my last video, I actually did a sketchbook tour of this Royal Talens, and you would have noticed that these are the colors that I have been using mostly in all of these pages. I've pretty much been using it since the end of November when I shared my autumn travel kit, which was this one. I'll link the video for you as well. Now in this one I showed you how to do a limited palette with the autumn palette, which had a few lighter colors than the winter one does. As you can see, it's quite dark because I'm in the UK and winter in the UK is very dark, and a lot of the colors that I see in nature or that I tend to use during this time are these darker colors. But now let's do something interesting. Using this color palette, I'm going to use my color book. This is my color sketchbook in which I plan colors for various things. This is a painting I'm doing right now. So I've got my color palette and I have mixed the colors that I can mix with this palette and see what I want to use. Then I've got this one, which is another painting I'm doing. I've tested them out next to it with color pencils over the top. Again, this is acrylic, but the color palette is very similar to what I've got in my winter palette. And as you can see, that's what's influenced me. But this is what I do with the colors. I mix them and make sure that I know the entire range of colors that I can get with that palette. Now, without doing this, I'm going in blind to painting. So if I'm doing a final painting and I'm using these colors, I don't really know what they can do without doing this. So it's a learning curve, again, mixing things and creating glazes with matte medium, figuring out what I can mix in order to get a lighter shade and so on. So when I have a palette, I always like to experiment with it and do some options of what I could do. From this palette, if I were to take out just a few pencils and do something with them, what would it be? Now, during the winter, a lot of things are browns and very, very deep greens, almost a brown, and then some pops of color with reds. So let's try one where we use the Winsor & Newton sepia. There's a sepia there. And then let's get a mid-tone. I'm using Tombow 912. And then for a pop of color, maybe we can go with 626 maybe? Or let's do my favorite, which is Winsor & Newton yellow. So that's one combination you could use. And then on top of that, I would probably use Castle Brown to match that brown there. And then Castle Earth, sorry. And then maybe this Neocolour to match that yellow. And so as I'm going, you can see how I'm taking colors out and putting them back in. And that's how I would generally work with this kit so that I don't lose anything when I'm out and about. For the middle one, I don't really have a pencil to match, but I would probably use something like this mid-brown over that. Or I would use the raw umber 10% to get a white shade. It's still a little bit wet, so this won't work on top of that just yet. So that's one sort of warm color palette that I could use. The second one, let's use my other favorite, which is the Winsor & Newton Indigo. That's a super dark color. So along with that, I want to go, let's say, cool again. So let's use Tombow 228 for a nice mid-tone. Again, a cool green. And maybe use cool gray, N65 for that. And then add a fourth color, which will be white, which this is a really nice mix. So you can get a lighter shade of whatever you're working on. And then also you can get highlights. With this, I would use the Derwent Chromaflow Deep Sea. What a beautiful color, isn't it? And then I would also probably use, with this color palette, I would use black noir. And perhaps I might use the Derwent Lightfast as well in forest, this green, because it has slightly cool and warm undertones. Like I find that if I put it with warm colors, it'll go with that. And if I put it with cool colors, it goes with that as well. And then let's pop the Neocolour over that, Neocolour 1, so that it doesn't blend in too much. Again, it's a bit wet, so it won't go on quite as well. And here's the Aquarelle pencil as well. So you can see it gives you quite a nice white on top of these colors. By the way, this is the Sea White of Brighton sketchbook, in case you want to know what I'm using. I don't think I mentioned Sea White in a video lately, but there was a time when I used to mention them all the time. But yes, I still use their sketchbooks. All right, so there's two palettes that I could get from this bigger overall palette. Then let's say I was working just in black and white, didn't have a lot of time, had to do just a quick sketch. So I might use the Pitt Graphite Matte, right? And then I can get different shades with it. I can use the side of it in order to get more textures. I can also do some cross hatching to get more detail, do some scribbles like that in order to get different textures. And then over that, I might actually use, I could do two things. One is I could use this sort of warm Neocolour, or I could go really dark and use this indigo. Let's do that over here. And then I would use my water brush pen thing and squish it and get more color out of it. And can you see, you can still see, oh, let's wipe that, get some more water in. You can still see the pencil lines under, but there's a different effect that you get with both of these. This is obviously darker, but you can also blend it out and get much lighter colors. And then over the top of that, you can still use the pencil in order to get different effects. So that's a different way to use just one color. So it's kind of like a watercolor wash and pencil, but it dries much faster. And obviously it's in a crayon form, so you don't actually have to add the water then and there. What you can do is you can, let's say, draw a branch of a tree or whatever, and then pop your Neocolour in, whether you're using it inside or you can just use outside to emphasize what you're doing. Leave that there even if you don't have a water brush with you, and then when you go home later on, you can use your water brush and get your effects like so. Okay, there's three options there. Then let's do something where, let's say we are doing, let's use the Caran marker. So let's say we're doing a really deep dark green along with a yellow. I have been using this with darker colors, so the edge is a little bit discolored. And then maybe a pop of orange for some orange berries or something like that. I was out of frame, apologies. So there's the dark Caran marker and dark olive, lemon yellow, and then the orange pop there. Again, with this, you can use the white to get a lighter shade. Let's pop that out in order to blend it out or to get highlights over the top. The white is really versatile as well. Then I think I showed you in the last video, which was a sketchbook tour, this page. This is done literally with 3 or 4 colors. So the Winsor & Newton indigo, the Caran marker white, see, you can get a lighter shade. This water brush, because the indigo spreads quite a lot with a water brush. And that deep sea pencil, where's it gone? The Derwent Chromaflow Deep Sea. So that's a really good monochrome combination as well if you don't want to use color. With this, you could always add a black, although it's not essential if you want a really, really deep shade on top of that. And that is the Luminance Noir pencil, which works with quite a lot of different things. I mean, a lot of people say don't include black in your color palette, but I do like to include it because it is a color and it works in certain cases. It doesn't always draw your picture down and make it dark. So there's those. Now let's come on to if I am drawing something in nature and I want to get a variety of greens. Let's just use greens. So we have the Tombow 228. There's the Caran marker olive black. So you've got a mid-tone and a dark tone already. Then I like to use the Posca whenever I want a swatch of ink. So I just boop it like that quite a lot and then swish it with my finger. Right? There we go. There's a bunch of ink. And swoop it down. See? I mean, yes, my finger does get covered in ink, but that's how I work half the time. And you can get really nice effects with this, right? Again, the ubiquitous white. This does a lot when you mix it with different colors. There we are. And then let's do, whoops, Tombow 177. I would say that's more light and that's more a mid-green. There's also this one, which I don't consider a green really, 098. It's more like a green gold, which is, let's come back to this here, which is that one there. It's more like a yellowy color, but it is actually a green, so, you know, we could use that. Did we already use the 249? We did not. So there's that as well. So if you're doing a landscape, there are plenty of colors in this palette that will really help you, particularly this last one as well, which is 312. See, it's kind of a bluey green, so that would be really nice for skies. And again, I mean, I go over this again and again and again, but using a white really gets you a myriad of shades. And again, with all of this, I would probably end up using the Derwent Chromaflow Deep Sea on top of all of them. Look what it does. It changes depending on what you're using it on. The Posca is not quite dry yet. It's really pretty dark, right? And then if you use it on top of the white, it gives you more of a blue tone. But I really like how that looks on top of everything. Then this yellow is another versatile color to use on top. It's a really, really bright yellow, but when you put it on top of something, see how it changes that color. Makes it somehow more vibrant and at the same time not. You can get so many tones and shades just by mixing colors. So let's just have a bunch of this yellow. And you can also see now the way I'm experimenting with this. This is how you should experiment with your materials. Play around with them. It doesn't matter that they're expensive. It matters that you know how to use them. You can have the most expensive materials and do nothing with them and they'll just sit there. Look at that. Look at the difference between this actual color and when you mix it with a yellow base. There's the actual color there. And then where is that green gold? There's the actual color. Then when you mix it with the yellow, it kind of becomes more ochre-y. The yellow adds to it somehow. Then when you use the darker green, gives it more yellow tone. Can you see the difference in the tones there? Whereas using them neat and using them on top of a yellow base. Now, what if you were to put a cool base down? Let's use this one. That's the cool base. And if you were to use the green gold on top of that, it becomes a bit duller. If you're using the same color over the top, it just becomes a bit darker. It's easy to have different layers and different color tones by doing that. So here's the dark green, and I think that was that one. Here's the mid green. Actually, it's kind of light green in there, isn't it? I think that was that one. So let's just do that there. So again, you have warmer tones just by using a yellow undercoat and cooler tones just by using a cooler undercoat. So the variety that you can get from a palette like this is unbelievable. Even though I have quite a lot of markers, here I've literally just used 5 colors and you can get quite a lot of variety for that. Again, let's try the Deep Sea on top of it. I feel like it works for both the cool and the warm tones simply because it picks up the color that's behind it. And that's why I like this so much. I think the Posca Indigo used to be one of my favorites. Here's how it looks. But I feel like the Deep Sea has taken over because it just has that slight richness that the Posca is too blue. Do you know what I mean? It's too blue. So I feel like this is better. I do also have another, I think it's quinacridone blue in Luminance, which I will use in my spring palette. Which actually, this is why I'm showing it to you, is because I'm closing this palette and putting it away and taking out a bunch of new colors in order to use for spring. So that will be probably my next video after that. So here are some of the options that you can do with this color palette. I hope that I explained all right. And I hope that you will experiment with your own art supplies instead of just leaving them or thinking they're too expensive. Art materials are meant to be used. The only wrong way to use them is to not use them. Anyway, that's all I have for you in this video. I hope you enjoyed looking at my winter travel kit and my winter palette that I've been using for all these months. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!